right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the panel section of today's event. We're very fortunate to have our guests here with us. I don't think I need to make introductions. You met Roxanne and Shane this morning, and on the far end for me there is someone you all know now, having seen Warrior Spirit. So welcome to Will George. Let's practice what we learn, right? Wonderful to have them here with us. I have nothing prepared. I'm going to turn this over to our school captains and our pluralism stewards, who have a bunch of questions that were generated by you, actually. And I will just say, having read through the questions, there were some brilliant and beautiful questions in there that really give me confidence that this group of this generation is on the right track. So I'm going to stop talking, turn it over to our stewards, who will ask questions of the panel. And panelists, if you don't mind speaking into a mic, we are recording this. It doesn't mean you have to talk long. It's okay to be brief, but just if you can use the mic, that'd be wonderful. So I don't know who's got the first question, but over to the facilitators. Thank you.
So to get us kicked off, we know that all of you guys are leaders and activists in your own communities. And connecting back to the documentary that we watched in advance of today's panel, we wanted to ask each of you, what is your personal interpretation of what is a warrior spirit?
I think for me it's someone who doesn't give up. I think it takes a lot of curiosity and a lot of optimism and hope for the future. And I think it also means to take care of yourself, because if you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anybody else. So those would be the things that I think are qualities of a warrior spirit.
Hello? Yeah, I think I should go next because I think Will needs to be the leader on this one and go last. Yeah, for me, it's, especially right now and speaking to youth, talking earlier about truth. To me, the warrior spirit, and you think about being a warrior and like fighting and everything, most of the battle is right here. It's inside yourself. And again, knowing certain truths, that spirit that you have inside of you, there's going to be a lot of times where you're going to be expected to do something that goes against your own conscience and your own values. And society, and we're going to talk a little bit about colonialism and what happened here in Canada. I think there was a lot of people who went against what they thought inside because generally everybody else was, doing that. And you get caught up in the moment and you get blinded by what's happening in society. But again, if you know what's happening around you and you feel like you want to act one way, but society's telling you to act a different way, and you do what society tells you to do instead of what your heart tells you to do, then I don't think you're being true to your warrior spirit and what we think you're meant to do.
Well said, thank you. Yeah, for me, that warrior spirit that we speak of, that is mentioned in the film and the documentary, for me, warrior spirit is I am everything that my ancestors had prayed for. Everything that they suffered and that they went through. They prayed for people like us. And it's a high honor to have that warrior spirit embedded in us. To echo some of Shane's words he shared earlier, I can't remember how he mentioned it, but this is our richness. This is where to go against something that that is just, and that justice that we seek, and to have that warrior spirit, that strength to pursue that and to continue on that path of challenging these things. And then I'm sure you guys are. A lot of you are excited to watch that film and to have me here, so thank you for having me here. Thank you, Darren, for bringing this forward to the students and seeking that truth that is well needed. That dark history of Canada that I speak of. There's a lot of things we're not aware of and they're not spoken of. So I thank you guys, each and one of you, for seeking that and having that understanding of what happened to our people. And again, I'm just, it's a high honor for me to be that one that stands up for our people, that challenges the Canadian government, because I know it's right. So for me, that's kind of what warrior spirit is for me. Thank you.
Right, thank you for that. So the next question is for Ms. Charles. So art has always been a very powerful form of activism and has been used in movements such as the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So like a notable example is the Red Dress Project. So they're used to both spread awareness, inspire greater action. Our question is, how does the work of indigenizing logos, such as our schools, relate to your vision of what Canada should be?
I think that's a really good question, and for me, it makes me think about the White Rock. So that rock is painted white, and the city's called White Rock, and there's no visual representation whatsoever that we were ever on that landscape. In 2018, we got a disconnection notice to our water supply that I bathe my children in, that I brush my teeth with. And I attribute that to the lack of visual representation on the land. White Rock, the city of White Rock, is only 60 years old. It's younger than my grandmother. But somehow the sense of ownership amongst the people, they don't even have any acknowledgement of whose territory they are in, or the fact that they're residing on stolen land. And I say stolen land, we say unceded a lot, and I just wanted to share something with you guys. I had an amazing opportunity to work with Alex Neighborhood House, and we had a ceremony last Sunday, and they're an organization, a not-for-profit organization in Surrey. Their actual not-for-profit number is 36, so they've been here for quite a long time, I think like 1912 or something like that. Crescent Beach is on a village site. A lot of our archaeological materials were removed from that site, along with ancestors, and put on display at the Surrey Museum. And so when you go down there for multiple generations, we never felt comfortable or welcome there. And I know we talk about racism a lot, and we have a really diverse population, but the experience of racism that my husband and I often experience is that we're gonna steal something. Like somehow our baggy clothes and our beads and those sort of things will get followed around Home Depot, like we can't afford to buy the tools. And I've been here for my whole life, like 45 years. I have a home that I have gone and got supplies there for like 20 years. So for me, it was a really emotional day, and I was crying, and my mom was there. They blanketed my grandmother, and they had an apology ceremony for the lack of inclusion that we've had on the site. And I don't know if you know, but when you come down Crescent Beach and you go over the railroad tracks and you take your first right to go down to Blackie Spit, down that first little place before the stop sign, you're gonna drive over 200 baskets. On the left-hand side where the doctor's office is where we used to make our canoes. And on the right-hand side is where all the fishing weirs, nets, and things are made. And remains. So there are ancestral remains that are on private property. This is really heavy stuff, so I'm sorry, but I think it's about truth, and you live here, so I would like you to know, just as our children have to know and carry that information on as well. But a lot of those private residents are actually on our burial sites. And burial sites in Canada for Indigenous people are not protected, only cemeteries. So it's a little bit different from the States. But one thing that I believe art, like for me, so Salish people, like Shane said, that's our only physical. It's like a tangible thing, the art is. But there's so much more. There's a lot of prayer and a lot of things that go into even preparing us to be here. And I do believe that symbolic nature can be really transformative. So for the city of White Rock, I was asked to do an exhibition, and I turned it down because they had been cutting off our water. And I was like, why should I do this exhibition for your museum? Even though they're kind of not the same entity, but they're connected. the curator said to me that I could do any sort of exhibition that I wanted. And so that sat with me when I was doing my master's at SFU. And I did a lot of exploration of the site and spent a lot of time at the beach. And the one thing that really resonated with me is that rock is not white. That rock is a granite rock. That rock was brought here by glacial drift, and it correlates with our origin stories, which we've been told our whole life. So one of those things is that rock, there was a princess in Cowichan, and that's where our family connections and ties are too. And so they fell in love, this son of a sea god and this daughter of a chief. And it was forbidden, they weren't supposed to be together. And so when they threw that rock, it was just small, but it got bigger and bigger and bigger until it got here. So for me, it does really in an abstract way. I'm an artist and I think quite abstractly. So for me, in an abstract way, it really does tell our origin. And it also is like, through our other stories, is that we're survivors of the Great Flood, that there were 2 canoes and that they put these belongings in the canoes and the children, and that's how we arrived here. But to know those stories, for me, I don't view myself different from the sea. I don't view myself different from the salmon or the orcas or the land or the trees or the wind. I really do feel that they're an integral part of my being, but that we are all interconnected. I think in a lot of Western education, we're separated from nature, and I don't believe that's true. So with that, this is like the longest answer, but with that, what I did is I actually sculpted a rock that looked like the white rock. I spray painted it, looked like granite, and I covered it in plaster to make it look like the white rock. And then in the museum, I had an exhibition called Pequalis, and I asked all the community members to bring forward things like what it meant, what Pequalis meant to them. And in my research, one of the things is Pequalis doesn't necessarily apply to the rock directly translated. It means white place. And so when I think about what that means, what does it mean that was this white place? Well, I'll tell you, for me, it means abundance, an abundance of food, abundance of shellfish, so that whole beach would have looked quite different before the railway. And that would have been all covered in white shells, like this beautiful white place when you go to other beaches. And the reason is because 90% of our food source came from that water. And so what I did in the exhibition is something where people call performance art, but for me it's a contemporary ceremony that's speaking to issues going on today. And I hammered the plaster off of the rock. And sometimes I think that's what you have to do. Sometimes it's not enough to look at a picture. Sometimes you have to feel uncomfortable in a space and then feel those feelings. And that's why I really wanted all of you to watch Warrior Spirit, because in very much this design is deeply connected to that. And I thought it would be a better way is to like actually see and feel and go through it, because film can be a form of artwork as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Charles. I really appreciated your message and your story. So, Mr. Jackson, a question for you now. Mr. Jones mentioned to us that you have done some pretty incredible leadership work supporting your culture and community through your art and your galleries. Can you share any examples with us?
Again, I do a lot of work. I always say I'm a recovering lawyer. I spent a number of years, and it is almost like 12 steps. It's really weird because I get dragged back in. And a lot of the work I've been doing over the last decade or so has been around artwork and Indigenous legal constructs. And I've had the fortune of being able to train judges and lawyers on these constructs to a reasonably high level. But I was mentioning during the break, again, getting back to truth, one of my pieces, which is a double-headed golden eagle, or chaskin in our language where I'm from, at contact, this figure was all over the place. And again, it represents our laws. The double heads represented equality, not just between men and women, but our two-spirit folks as well, and LGBTQ, folks. We were seen as a threat. We were a strong threat to the powers that be, because it's hard to, subjugate people when they're free, especially free of spirit. There was a fellow by the name of Duncan Campbell Scott, who's an infamous name in our communities. This fellow was the architect of the residential schools, the whole system. And he was a very high-level Canadian leader and politician, but he also headed up the Royal Society of Canada, which was a group of intellectuals and academics and, science folks that were attempting, they did all these writings and they essentially created the fabric of Canada. And this fella, at the very same time as he was destroying our culture and preventing our children from speaking their language and making it illegal for us to practice our ceremony, where people were going to jail and, and children stolen away from their families, obviously, and their culture taken away. At the very same time he was doing that, he was stealing our ideals and our laws and our, just our culture and adding it to the fabric of Canada. So when you think about like our, and I see there's a lot of cultures all around us. Canada is based on immigration, our ideal around a mosaic. These are all beautiful teachings. They're not as well embodied in the colonial, motherland of Britain. They're technically very unique to Canada, and it's why we're so proud and we stand up so, so tall and proud around the world as being Canadians. We respect cultures and we love immigration and we love our brothers and sisters. These were Indigenous values that were essentially taken by this one man, and obviously there was others, but it's so ironic that this was, created the fabric of Canada, while at the same time this fella sort of plagiarizing our legal systems and our laws and values, while at the very same time it was almost like he was trying to burn the evidence that he had taken it by stealing our children and our culture and trying to cut that off. And if you look, there's a book called Royally Wronged. If you ever get a chance to read it, or any of the teachers here get a chance to read it. I'm supposed to be on a panel, I think, on this in the next few months. But if you look at the United States as well, and they acknowledge it, the US model is based on the Iroquois Confederacy, their constitutional model, and their political system is based on the Iroquois Confederacy. So again, these are things that not a lot of people know, but once you kind of understand it, then you see. And I don't want to talk too long now, but I did want to just make the point that we're in a very interesting state globally where, we can take a couple of different paths, and we're in an extremely, like, these Occidental sort of Western values are all about adversity and, whether it's capitalist ideals or, this adversarial sort of nature about going and colonizing countries, whether it's colonialism or what's happened in the past. There's no bigger time right now when it comes to, like, the wars that are going around the world, the environmental issues, climate change, all of our little, friends in the winged world and the sea world, and, they're all struggling right now, and the solution to everything are Four Corners teachings. Coming together, taking the strengths that everybody has, these, creator-given strengths, making ourselves stronger and, and going after the real problems, not each other. Thanks.
This is a question for Mr. George. We saw in Warrior Spirit that you went to great lengths to stand up for your community. And we have so many great questions that center on your experience. To begin, how has the fight been since the documentary, and has the documentary had the impact that you hoped it would?
I think I heard what you said there. How was the fight since the documentary? I mean, unfortunately, that oil is flowing now. You know, there is tankers coming through the water, and so it's a big concern. You know, how can you fight globalists? How can you fight, you know, the Canadian government in that way where you can stop that infrastructure? But it wasn't only just to stop that infrastructure. It was to create more awareness of what's continuing. You know, to echo some of what Shane's words are of what they've done to us. They're still continuing to do this to our people and run through our territories, show that separation between our different nations. And, you know, we're all related, you know, all the way up through from here to where this pipeline goes through. We're all related, and it's through that salmon, you know, and it's in our DNA, it's in our bones. But the fight personally for me is, you know, it took a lot out of me. You know, I don't know if you all know, but me and Roxanne, we've been married almost 7 years now. And we're just a small husband and wife team that they're called to do these efforts. You know, quite often on our doorstep, our loved ones come there with their sorrows, their concerns, and you know, the wife said, "How can I be a warrior if I'm not a warrior for myself?" So, with these years of standing up, and then having the doubts within myself that if I can stop this multi-billion-dollar infrastructure, the doubts of my own people, my own family. So it took a lot out of me, really. Personally, it wore me out. And but at times, you know, there's that ebb and flow to our lives that each and every one of us have. So unfortunately, that the flow of oil is the expansion is in operation. And then the huge threat is that it's going to increase that tanker traffic. And the size of these vessels that are coming through our waters are something we haven't seen in our shores. They have to dredge underneath our bridges to get these massive, massive tankers to come through. So that hasn't happened quite yet. The oil isn't flown at that magnitude yet. But again, having that tanker increase is something we all should be concerned about. And the thing with bitumen, you know, we see that human error happens, mechanical failure happens. You know, these are the worries, concerns that I have. But that bitumen will sink to the bottom. It doesn't float like oil. So when they mix it with that nasty chemical to get it through the pipeline, dilute it to get it from the tar sands down here, it will sink. So there's not a lot that is told. So by having this film and being part of that cinematic history, of telling these key points that are not spoken in, there's a gag order in the media for these things not to be generally told, that these are the threats, these are dangerous. It's supposed to be a national interest to have this working engine of Canada, they say. So, you know, our values being taken away from us in that way is, it's hard to continue moving forward. So we must take care of ourselves at these times where we have these doubts. So. I hope that answered the question. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, sure. The second part of the question. Thank you. Hey, behind every great man, there's a woman telling him what to do. Thank you, Annie. Has the film done what? Has it done what I sought out to do? Yeah, by looking at in the audience here and having it brought forward in this way, because you know, you heard Chief Chappell say it. You're the future of this nation, and so yeah, it's doing everything I hoped and prayed for. You know, every time we come to these panels or discussions, we pray our words fall into your hearts. You know, we pray that you receive them, because you are our future, really, of this nation. So I thank you all, each and every one of you, for having that concern, watching my film, and having, you know, being so excited to have me here. There's a few young fellows up there when we're having snacks. They're pretty excited to meet me. So, you know, it has done everything I've asked for. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that thoughtful answer, Mr. Mr. George. For anyone on the panel, what can and should non-Indigenous people do to make a difference and support Indigenous communities? Are there any meaningful actions that stand out to you specifically?
I will go. So I noticed that like sometimes my mind's all over the place, and so I didn't finish two things. Like the one with the white rock, when I removed all the plaster, like the rock was only like this big. It wasn't very big, and it was only symbolic. But the city of White Rock, after that event, met with Chief and Council to discuss the removal of the paint from the rock. And the second thing I wanted to share with you is about Alex Place. So when my mom came down to the ceremony, a lot of people had no idea what it was for. And the reason why it was so emotional, because what the ceremony was to return the lands that Alex Place is situated on. And they did that by calling witnesses, and they did it in Coast Salish law with having hired a speaker from Squamish to represent their family. They're not Indigenous, but they respected Indigenous ways and did everything they could to educate themselves. So one of the first things I think is, like any organizations, is to have an Indigenous facilitator come in and work with you and explore what you have in your heart, what you might have to offer in your diverse set of skills, to learn a little more. And then after that, like there was a gentleman from Catesy by the name of Len Pierre who came in and did a lot of work with Alex Place at the request of Penny Bradley, their executive director. And when they were doing that work, one thing with the hiring of the people at Alex Place was that they shared what they had in their heart, that they had the intention of giving back this land. And when they hired the staff on site, one of the only questions that they were asked is, can you get behind this work? And so to hear that was incredibly moving. And there was also another woman from Squamish, a facilitator, Nahaney, I'm sorry, I can't remember her first name, but she did a lot of work with them as well. And then I was asked to come in as a local consultant to kind of guide them in the work and how would be the best respectful way to connect with not only Chief and Council, but also with community. And so to hear, like even though I'd been working on this for 2 years and knew that the land was coming back, like to hear it be said out loud was incredibly emotional for me. And right after they did that, because they blanketed the elders, they blanketed the youth, and they blanketed Chief and Council. And right after that, they moved over to a table that had some papers on it. And my arms were like, they've never been so higher, because I was just like, thank you. Okay, because now we don't just have it in our own cultural law, but now we have it in yours too. We have it in both. And so it gave me a lot of hope. Last weekend gave me a lot of hope, and I pray that it is the ripple effects, that we'll see the ripple effects of this. And one thing that I shared that day with them is that there's no monetary value you can put on that land. That's our village site, that's the largest intact plot of land that we have there, that we could have food security there, that we could have housing there, that we could have cultural representations and spiritual places of gathering, that we can have our canoes back out on the water. And so, yeah, that's just really what I wanted to share with you. And I'm sorry because I feel like I didn't even answer the question.
If I can add to that, you know, what the wife is saying, you know, what I see, like, she's sharing the ceremonial aspect to it, but for me, it's land back has happened. They actually use that word. It's one of the richest postal codes in Canada, Crescent Beach, and it's literally built on the bones of her ancestors. So, I don't know where, I would like to shake it up a little bit here, you know, if we can all, you're allowed to clap at this moment, but let's be proud of actually land back being given back to the people here. So let's give my wife a round of applause. My dear grandma over there, you know, this is something for all of us to be proud of, each and every one of us to be happy for. You know, land back has happened, so that is something to be grateful for. My dear grandma, mother over there, my little niece, you know, so proud and honored that this has actually happened. This never happens. So, yeah, thank you.
I'll echo that a little bit. We've had some amazing steps forward, and recently, if you've watched the news, Haida Gwaii, there was a deal made up north, what were formerly known as the Queen Charlotte Islands. There was a lot of bravery, and I have to actually put my hands up to the government of the day for following through and giving that land back. And you know, and it's a real litmus test to see what's going to happen. There's a lot of folks that are just so scared about us taking control of our lands. Like, you know, all hell's going to break loose, and you know, the sky is going to fall if we get our lands back. And you know, and I have to say, like, you know, we have a lot of problems on the Sunshine Coast where I'm from, especially up near Pender Harbor, which you'll see on the news as well, because there's a dock management issue. This was our biggest village in at Contact, and people think that, you know, there was some big battle and we got pushed out and they conquered us and this. We got smallpox, and our population was decimated into the 90th percentile, and we were essentially pushed out of areas that we had occupied since time immemorial. And now there's a bunch of millionaires and billionaires in there that have completely polluted the entire area. And I keep falling back on our ways and you know, and how we were. And I don't mean to be Pollyannish or anything about how we were. Obviously, you know, every society has its good and its bad and its issues. But our biggest, most symbolic art piece is a welcome figure. You know, I don't know how many of you come through from, you know, holiday destinations and walk through those doors at the airport and you're greeted by two cedar welcoming figures. From, you know, north of where I'm from, north of Powell River, all the way down to Oregon, those are Coast Salish lands. That's Coast Salish. And you'll see so many welcome figures, and at Contact, that's what settlers would have seen, you know, and, you know, coming up with, you know, different narratives about what that was about. It's still like that. Bring your people in, like, join us. Let's figure out what the best is for the land, to, you know, to have respect for the, you know, the beings that are already on the land, but to take care of each other. It's so important right now. And again, like, what's the worst that can happen by if you give your land back? And no, we're not coming for your houses, you know, we're not gonna boot you out of your house, and it's nothing like that. It's just a way of taking care of one another. So I do like the idea of at least starting that process.
Thank you for that. Yeah. So along similar lines, and again for anyone on the panel, what are some things that non-Indigenous youth like us can do to make a difference and help support your communities?
I think exactly what you're doing now, what you're preparing for your life, is having that understanding, and that's what we pray for and we ask of you as you know, we'll say guests in our territory, but it's just kind of exactly what you're doing right now. You're paying attention, your ears are open, your heart is open. I think that's what we can ask of you, and you guys are already doing it. So, thank you.
Yeah, I think you guys are off to a great start, and you're going to be going into jobs in various industries. And I think one thing is awareness, right? To be aware of where you are, maybe whose territory that you're on, maybe even, you know, being aware of some of those values. For me, like honesty, being truthful, having integrity, following through and being true of your word, recognizing the impacts on the world that you have around you. Coast Salish design, if you look at the design on your friend's shirt, you'll notice that there's these crescents that are echoed throughout the design. And for me, as a Coast Salish person, it's a reminder of that connection to water, the reminder of the connection to astrology, to the sky, but also a connection to the fact that we have an impact on the world around us. Sometimes it might not feel that way. Sometimes it might take decades to move as far as you would like, but that when you drop a little stone in the water, it's going to have reverberations. And for me, I think also just I want to say, like, when we're learning the language, we're learning the language together. Like, my community is going to be learning the language with your community. My community is going to be learning the language with the students of Wahpeton. And that one reason is because a lot of us haven't had the privilege or space to not worry about a lot of other things. To learn language is an extreme privilege. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to be working with Wahpeton because I'm learning with the kindergarten class, right? And then the word for the word for cow is moose-miss. And it stuck with me because I'm like, why do we even have words for cows? Like, I don't know how they created, like, because they're constantly updating, right? Like a female moose maybe, or like a cow, right? A slow moose. But, yeah, I think little things, and I think honestly looking at the calls to action, because there's so many things on those calls to action that we might not be in a position, and to understand that Indigenous people are fighting every day. You know, that it comes with a tremendous burden. My son is 20 and he's a knowledge keeper, and the amount of heavy knowledge that he has to carry, it's tremendously important, not only that he cares for himself, but that I also care for him a little extra because of the burden of having to carry that information for future generations. And I think that it could help lessen the burden tremendously if you too were knowledge keepers and you were able to carry that history within your own self and be able to have conversations, respectful conversations with others about these things. So, Haichka, thank you.
I definitely wanted to follow up on that just a little bit. I also want to just talk about privilege. You have a beautiful school here, and I know that I hope you appreciate your privilege, because even better than a lot of public schools, you've got a privilege. I have a privilege. I'm lighter skinned. My mom was blonde with blue eyes, I have to acknowledge my own privilege in the work that I do, and it's opened doors for me that hasn't open for a lot of my cousins and my family. It's really important to acknowledge that. And the most honorable thing you can do with that privilege is use it in service of others. So I try my best to do that. But I also wanted to acknowledge as well that, again, some truth. I do a lot of work around medical advocacy. The life expectancy in my community, and I think it was about 15 years ago, because I've spent 20 years in hospitals advocating for Indigenous folks when they said there was no racism in hospitals and that we were treated just like everybody else when we knew we weren't. I was fortunate enough to be part of, I wrote a small piece in this report called the In Plain Sight Report, and they actually definitively acknowledged, that obviously there's racism in hospitals. 14 years ago, I worked with my nation to figure out how long do we live? 56 years old is my life expectancy. I'm 3 years off that right now in my community. We've had 6 funerals in the last week and a bit, and I don't come from a very populous community. That was before COVID. Apparently, nationally, our life expectancy has gone down 6 years since COVID because of the opioid crisis, which, I don't want to go deep into that, but a lot of those substance abuse issues are residential school related, and obviously COVID. So again, I want you to think about your privilege in the fact that my life expectancy, I'm hitting the ground tomorrow to head home for 2 more funerals tomorrow. we are constantly under siege, taking care of sick relatives and going to funerals and taking time. I take off way more time for funerals than I do vacations. We can't be the only ones fighting for this. Please use your privilege. You want to know what to do? Use your privilege to fight for something bigger than yourselves, fight for something that's right. You know, because we're on the ground and we're fighting and we are really, I'm going to start crying as well. We are really bloody exhausted. We're really exhausted. And I know these two here, I have so much respect for them because they fight endlessly, you know? And when you're sitting there and, you know, and literally, and we've all been here, you know, where we're just sitting there and we're so inundated with mourning and pain that we just want to die. That we just want to die. And people like, you know, these two amazing people, you know, they get up and they fight every day. And they probably have so many of those mornings, and I know I've had a lot. And you get up and you fight.
Hello? Yeah. Thank you. I really respected what you had to say, Mr. Jackson. I really respected your message. So, Mr. George, we have a lot of students taking Law 12 this year, and in the documentary, the Gladue report was discussed in the latter half of the film. And you expressed it was a grueling process filling out that form. Do you think there is a more effective and less intrusive alternative to the Gladue process?
I knew you guys would have some pretty sharp, intelligent questions for me today. You know, yes, I do bring up, you know, I covered as much as I could in that documentary. I had to reduce it quite a bit. You know, going into that with those charges, and I didn't hire a lawyer because lawyers are a little restricted what they can say in these courtrooms, and I'm not. You know, there was times in that courtroom where my knuckles were sore from hitting that and yelling at that judge. I could do it, lawyers can't. But I gave her teachings in that courtroom, and I didn't want to do that Gladue report. I don't, not really aware of what the Gladue report was at all, really. I just knew it wasn't designed for our people. I knew it was destructive to our people. That's kind of all I knew going into it. And, you know, I couldn't imagine how many other people that had to go through that and relive their their life and their childhood and have to explain that to someone to, you know, get your charges dropped. I've done a lot of things in my life. I've broken the law. You know, I've never went to prison. You know, I've never went to jail by doing any of the, you know, these rough things I did back in the 90s or the early 2000s when I was younger. But you know, I do something right, stand up for my people, and I'm facing prison time, and then I'm having to explain to them, you know, what led me up to that point. So I mean, it was quite a bit. So I'm glad you guys received that and picked up on that part. But you know, I don't know how to change that. I mean, we were on a panel, or no, it was a conference a few weeks ago about Indigenous justice, I believe it was, and then leading up to this, there was another Gladue report writer that she was really advocating for this, and then weeks leading up to like the course that I always had this conference, it was called Gladue Report, Helpful or Harmful, and this lady was concerned about the title. She was Indigenous as well, but I guess in some cases it has worked for Indigenous people, but you know, I don't really know how to wrap this up with if there's any changes or what else could work for our people, but it's incredibly difficult in the justice system. You know, some of our cases are won, and some are that's a lot of injustice still in those courtrooms. You know, their paperwork, their documents. We know exactly how they're lined. You know, in that courtroom, it's pretty much they made up their own law as they're going. Man, it was really tricky. It was really bizarre place to be in that courtroom, standing up for my people, our lands, rights, and titles. You know, I don't do this for my family. You know, I do this for your family too. But being in that courtroom was really bizarre. So I hope that answered your question.
Could you repeat the question? I think I got it.
Repeat the question? Yeah, okay, yeah. So it was about how the, in the documentary, right, Mr. George here, he went through and he had to write the Gladiator report. And there was a segment about him reliving his traumas as a child. So we were just concerning about the fact that, is there any other way where a person of his past doesn't have to go through what he goes through, just to explain to the judge why and justify his charges?
Yeah, the legal system in general is skewed against Indigenous folks, and it always has been. One of the reasons why I removed myself from practicing like formal Canadian law is because I felt, you know, like I wasn't having an impact. And there's a lot of non-Indigenous lawyers that are allies within the field that were having much bigger impact, and I felt, you know, going back to my traditional roots and using art, and, you know, again, I've been getting dragged back into law, and in a good way, because, you know, it's having an effect on the Canadian legal system. Gladue report writing is for after you've already been convicted of a crime in the Canadian system, and it goes into sentencing. And I have to say, like, you know, this whole thing around, you know, who we are as Indigenous people, and having to put yourself at the mercy of the court. And I remember these bits, you know. It's not productive in any stretch of the imagination to feel sorry for somebody. And I think that's the way it's almost promoted, is like, what's happened to you? Oh, you poor thing. And I was talking about, like, there's this thing called the blanket exercise that goes around, and a lot of it is about, you know, what's happened to our people, and, you know, and I'm hoping that what I'm talking about, and I'm not trying to make you feel sorry for us, there's reasoning behind this. Understanding the gifts that we have to offer is more why you should learn about Indigenous culture, you know? The whole idea, again, around, you know, and I see a few little smirks and I don't know where they're coming from, but I can tell you, as women and Two-Spirit folks, you really would have loved our Indigenous values back when, you know, women were property and Two-Spirit people were being slaughtered. And I'm glad that we've come a long way in society, but those were our laws before contact. And they're still our laws today, and they can still be drawn on to solve the climate crisis, to solve a lot of the wars that are going on in the world if we just embody these values of unity within diversity. Getting back to the Gladue report, we don't, you know, in the system, we're not looking for people to feel sorry for us and give us a less sentence. I do a lot of work around restorative justice, where somebody has been, you know, is going to be convicted of a crime, and we have them deferred out of the system, where the, you know, the accused and the victim of the crime come together and talk about what had happened and try and find a better solution outside of the penal system, the justice system. I've never been involved in one that didn't end up a hell of a lot better than if they had gone through the system. Not just for the accused, but the victim of the crime. They can now walk down the street and see the perpetrator, and they're not going to feel uncomfortable like, yeah, I just sent you to jail. They've already worked through the issues, and they understand the history and what's happened. You know, these environmental views that Will holds, you know, they're held by a lot of our people. He's the only one that's got the courage, you know, and the internal fortitude to go and hang off of bridges and buildings, and it's, you know, to a lot of us that is like pretty powerful stuff. That needs to come out, and the issues around it need to come out, and that to me is part of the Canadian legal system. It was designed to not have a lot of these issues come out. It was designed to pigeonhole people into being, okay, well, you practiced your culture, this is way back when. Well, we just got a law on that, you know, and we talked about it up here, and that's great. So you're going to jail, you know, or we're having your children removed from you. That's, you know, we talked about it over here, and, you know, this is our legal system and our political system. That's not justice. You know, justice is having, you know, especially for something so high profile, is right from the get-go having that restorative model of justice and being able to talk deeply about the issues and not hiding behind laws.
Thank you both for your awesome answers. For me, when Sueson, when he was in court as his partner, I could maybe only attend 2 sessions. I was really uncomfortable. I spent a lot of time as a youth, actually. You know, I was a problem youth with a lot of anger and what I was witnessing around me, and I didn't always deal with that in the most constructive ways. But it was probably the most uncomfortable I've ever felt in a courtroom. I wasn't on stand, I wasn't on trial. I was so confused looking at the lion and the unicorn in the courtroom that have no attachment to the land that we're situated on. The "In God We Trust" in French, below it, when so many horrendous things have happened across this country that are attached to the church, the RCMP, and the Canadian government. My lack of faith in the whole system. And when I think about this, I think for me it's accountability. Accountability to our leadership. Like these people, that judge needs to be educated. That judge doesn't even believe in unceded territory. Let it's legal, like that is legal language in the Supreme Court of Canada. Yet that can be denied on stand. And I truly believe that they weaponized the Gladue report in Sueson's case. That they knew exactly what it would do. That it would agitate him, that it would bring up a lot of hard feelings that would be difficult and make our life a little more difficult to fight the things that we were already in motion fighting. I truly believe that. And the reason why I do is Judge Fitzpatrick was also the judge on the Kamloops case as well, to Kamloops. And there was an elder, you know, older than Sueson. His name's Sues. He's a hereditary chief of Niskalnith Indian Band. He attended Kamloops Residential School, and he witnessed, this is difficult for me to even talk about, but as children they had to witness this, bodies being brought out and buried at night. That's how they found those 215 children, because it's in the living memory of our grandparents. My children are both Secwepemc, and their grandfather was one of them, that those are his memories. We've lost a lot of his siblings because they couldn't deal with the horrendous things that had happened to them. We have elders that are not able to speak their language because they were so abused that even if they try, their body, that trauma that resides in our body is there. So for me, it's about shifting those systems, holding accountability in the systems, like where's the education for them, for me? And when we are all in trouble, like I'll say this, like all of us are in trouble if we can't hold these systems accountable. If they can slap an injunction anywhere across the country that doesn't allow us to protest or gather, we are all in serious trouble. So that's where I want to put it back on, because those Gladue reports are being weaponized when they are brought into public evidence, like when they're submitted as a, what is it, Shane's the lawyer, right? When they issue it as a, what is it? No. They issue it to, no. Like when, so the Gladue report comes in and then you're like Crown and you're sending it to them evidence, like there's a word for it. What is it? Okay, but so when they enter those, right? Okay, because the Crown from Calgary was saying that she intentionally doesn't enter it in a certain way. Because if she enters it in a certain way, it becomes public record and everybody can look at your traumatic story for the rest of your life once it's submitted as evidence. So to me, yeah, it's a way huger systemic problem. And to hear, I had to leave. The one thing that was like was, well, Mr. George from Crown, well, Mr. George, you deserve the privilege of being a status Indian in this country. And I'm like, what the hell is that supposed to mean? Do you have any idea what cost it has come? Any of these privileges to be placed on a reservation, removed from your territory, have no control over your resources, and have an immense, dense population growing every day around you, cutting down all the trees, displacing all the animals, paving over all the waterways. Like, to me, that's not a privilege. And whatever the Canadian education system has done for the past 150 years has heavily failed Indigenous people, but not only Indigenous people, all of us, because it's not grounded in any truth. And I think that's probably all I have to say. But for me, like, it's obviously not all I have to say. For me, with the land back and the returning of the land and that stuff, the reason why, like, sometimes it feels hopeless for us, like Shane was saying. Sometimes it really feels hopeless. Like, we just had a loss as well. We're losing people to cancer before they're, you know, like, in their 50s, right? So we're losing. It is really, really crazy, and this impacts the health. And what I'd love for you all to understand is that when something's going on in a community, it affects the most vulnerable people first. So if someone has an ailment, it's going to affect them, right? So you might witness a lot of things affecting Indigenous people, but that doesn't mean that's not affecting each and every one of you as well. And the reason why the emotion, like, behind the land back is because if we want to talk about true reconciliation, the land is vital to that. If we don't, we deserve the ability to heal. And through that, we need the connection to the land. For us to get our vitamin D, we need these salmon. For those killer whales to survive, we need to stop the exportation of this dirty energy. And yeah, I really, really pray that this has touched your heart and minds, and I don't want anyone to be weighed down by it. And that's why I said curiosity for me, like, is part of warriorship, is getting curious. Get out there and discover and look and think about each individual skill set that all of you have and what you can offer in the transformation for a better world for all of us. Thank you.
I think I'm going to take this here because it is the end of our time, and what a beautiful place to end. I just a couple of things to say. Thank you to, of course, the panel for being here. Part of me, you know, having met with Roxanne and Shane leading up to this, it's been, I'm without any exaggeration, an absolute highlight of my last, I'm going to say 2 years. Just chatting with Roxanne beyond the crest, just chatting. What you hear today, the words are in our hearts, I hope, as has been requested of you. And you do have an immense amount of privilege, we all do, to walk out of this room today with some additional truth you may not have had before. Maybe this isn't new to you, but this second section was really a focus on the truth. And if it's heavy, then it's heavy. But I couldn't be more thankful to our panelists for sitting here at a time that's really challenging, right? Again, I kind of feel like this, we're asking esteemed leaders in their communities to come up here and tell us this is a hard day, I think, for people in Indigenous communities, as Chief Chapel alluded to. So I really want us all to understand how significant it was to have these three leaders here with us today for this panel. And I hope that the words are in your heart, and that when we walk out of this room today, we're thinking about reconciliation, because we do all have a role, and it is this generation. I want to thank the guests who also joined from Semiahmoo, that Roxanne's family and niece over there, and just joining this moment and ceremony with us. And to all of you for joining us at the panel here today. I know the 12s who watched Warrior Spirit, that was wonderful. And I know how much I think it meant to you. I know how much it meant to me. I've watched it more than one time recently. And we're just so lucky to have three leaders among us today, and I just hope that everyone takes something away from this. So I'll stop talking now, but to say thank you one more time. Huge, huge thank you to this panel for being here today at a really important time. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.